Ah, Monster Hunter, a game where you're given quests, go out on such quests in these wild environments, and hunt large monsters. Even in expeditions, you can freely hunt such creatures in their natural habitats. But what if you had to survive in such environments? Having to find food and hunt for your own survival without being given quests. I am ReaverJolt, and today, I will play Monster Hunter Rise like it's a survival game. I'll need to explain how this challenge is going to work. Since you can't technically craft gear out in the field, the way I'm doing it is by crafting all equipment beforehand before attempting the run. And to make it less complicated on myself, I fully upgraded each tier of weapon I'll be using. The reason for this is because I imagine that most survival games have gear that may not have upgrade trees, and that would take me much longer to make every individual unupgraded versions in their respective trees. As for armor, I have it mostly fully upgraded, but not everything because upgrading all armor is way too expensive. I chose the Flooded Forest for this challenge because it's my favorite map from the 3rd gen games, and because I like the idea of surviving in a lush jungle. I only made the gear from all the monsters that can appear in the Flooded Forest. If I did this challenge for other maps, I can grind for weapons and armor for those later. Now let's go over the rules. Rule number 1, choose a locale and craft every gear from monsters of that locale to prepare for the challenge. Rule number 2, one piece of that monster's gear is 3 of that monster's parts, 4 if it's an elder dragon. Rule number 3, must slay a monster in order to get the materials as well as shiny drops from the target monster. Rule number 5, must start with no armor and a base weapon, high rank. Rule number 6, no decorations or charms. Rule number 7, must stick with only one weapon type. Rule number 8, to beat the challenge, you must beat the final boss Elder Dragon of your choosing. You guys will have to find out what Elder Dragon I chose for this challenge. One last thing, I will be doing this video differently than what I normally do with some of my other challenges. I'm going to be doing this challenge from a perspective of a lost blacksmith that has a backstory. I'll be writing my script as if it's a log I'm writing down. So with all that out of the way, enjoy the challenge. Surviving the Flooded Forest, Day 1. I was unconscious, and after waking up, I was attacked by a pack of Jagras. I fled for my life and climbed a ledge so they wouldn't reach me. As I was exploring the forest, I was wondering how I even got here. All I remember was falling off the Soratorium during a trip to the next village where I was assigned as a blacksmith. If I recall correctly, there was a strange flying object that flew so fast it struck the ship, thus throwing me off the side. I believe this object was red in color when it attacked. After trying to remember how I got here, I decided to grab a few resources and find some food. The only food source I could find was a lone slagtoth wandering about. I was trying to sneak up on it, but it noticed me after a few seconds. After taking it down, I carved it for its meat and couldn't carve the meat well enough for it to be edible. So I tried to find more slagtoth, but the conditions have changed and there was an increase of ludroth in the area, which meant less food for me. So by nightfall, I stayed at the nearby ruin, next to a red toad. Having to sleep while starving wasn't particularly comfortable, but there's always tomorrow. Surviving the Flooded Forest, Day 2. When the sun rose, I moved out to find food. I was so hungry I couldn't even run, so I had to be careful when taking down the slagtoth. I was checking to see if there was any slagtoths, and I finally find a small herd in the mucky waters. I take it down and finally get meat soft enough to eat. I tried to get more meat from another, but didn't get any. Seems that soft meat is rare among these herbivores. I cook my meat, eat it, and was well sated. I decided to hunt more slagtoths since I would benefit not just from the meat, but also from its tough hide so I can make armor. I also found an abandoned camp and decided to use it as my home. I then hunt some ludroths as well for their parts. I then saw a big monster flying away. Could this be the flying object that struck the Soratorium that day? I would have to find out later in the night. After hunting more slagtoths for food and making armor from all the small ludroth parts, night fell and I saw the large monster again that flew earlier. I decide to move in for a closer look to see if it really was the flying object that caused the incident. Turns out, it was a basil goose and it looked too different from the flying object I saw. It wasn't even red. It did notice me and I had to get away. This species is very dangerous and aggressive. Once I got away, I noticed its flying speed. It was much slower than the flying object, so that rules this one out. Surviving the Flooded Forest, Day 3. I go out and gather more resources, get meat from slagtoths, and catch some fish. After crafting some healing items, I found a Kuluyaku nearby and decided to engage in combat. My hammer was pretty dull, thus making this fight drag on longer than it needed to. Later in the night, I finally take it down so I can get its parts to make both the gloves and a better hammer, which was very much needed. Surviving the Flooded Forest, Day 4. I went out in search of Remobras in the morning for their materials. They were easy to take down as all I needed to do was slay a nearby Bullfango as a trap for them. And as I expected, they took the bait and I took them down with no problem. But then there was a presence I was feeling. A terrible one at that. I decided to investigate. While on my investigation, I hunted more Romobras and crafted better gear. Just outside my camp, there was a black beast. I moved in to take a closer look in case this happened to be the flying object. And of course, it wasn't. The beast was a Reijang, and from what I know about this creature, it is not red. So it couldn't have been this creature. After that, I hunted a great Roggy, which was easy thanks to my new armor and hammer. Surviving the flooded forest. Day 5. I explored the forest a bit more and found a large pyramid. I was interested and decided to venture into it. Once I was inside, I found a strange turtle and decided to collect it for later use. The rest of the day was normal until the basil goose from earlier appeared. I tried to fight it and was very careful, but I did take severe damage, which triggered the turtle from earlier. But then I was knocked unconscious. Once I woke up, I figured I'm not ready for a creature like that yet. Later that night, I was hunting more Slagtots for meat when I came across a large creature with jet-like wings. But before I knew it, it flew away instantly. Could this be the flying object that attacked the ship the day I fell off? I would have to find out when I get a chance the next time I see it. Surviving the flooded forest, day 28. After not having much luck finding food, I go hunt in Arzuros for needed parts. As I was in combat with it, Arzuros ran into another area, and once I followed, I noticed the large jet-like creature again. While I had the opportunity, I decided to engage in combat with it. I was getting beaten and bruised, but I started coming back after knocking it over. But once I saw the red energy emanating off of it, I recognized it. This Valstrax is the flying object that knocked me off the Soratorium. I continued to fight it, but I was badly wounded and couldn't stand a chance, so I ran for my life and got away safely. But once I got my bearings again and looked to see if the creature was still around, it was gone. One of these days, I'm going to have to encounter it again. Surviving the flooded forest, day 29. It was 24 hours after the fight with Valstrax, but I was wounded and needed to get patched up, but my healing items were exhausted. I had climbed up the pyramid and found a shrine that had a crack in it. There was also a strange mural on the wall that looks like it had a snake with wings. I decided to wait in the shrine, and later that evening, a snake-like creature appeared in the crack from the altar. I've heard rumors from the locals on the Soratorium about this creature, that if you call it, it can heal your wounds, so I decided to try it. And sure enough, it worked. My wounds were healed and I was refreshed. After that, I went out to continue the fight I had with Arzuros, who admittedly kept stealing my honey. But then I found an Anjanath and ditched the Arzuros because I needed an upgrade. This fight took a while because my hammer was getting dull and I had to keep sharpening it. But eventually it goes down and I craft some gauntlets and a waist belt. Surviving the flooded forest, day 46. I decided to hunt more Romobras to make a better hammer, and on day 47, I hunted a Tobikadachi for a bit until it left the forest, and then another came around, so I hunted that one. The hunt took a while, but I was using it as training as I was getting better at using the hammer. I'm a blacksmith, so I'm more used to creating weapons than combat, but after a while, it went down and I crafted more armor. Surviving the flooded forest, day 64. As the days go by, I still wonder if I'll be able to find that Valstrax again. Beating it would certainly allow me to get out of this forest, but I feel I'm still not ready to take it on yet. I would need to be best equipped for an advantage. After pondering about that, I found a Nargacuga and decided to hunt it. It was a dangerous adversary, as I had moments of panic trying to sharpen my hammer and heal my wounds off with medical supplies, but I eventually took it down and crafted some gear. I would have made the hammer, but in another life, the hammer would have existed if it weren't for forgetting to craft it for some sort of challenge. Surviving the flooded forest, day 87. I was in search of another monster to hunt because I was in need of a better hammer. The only monster around worth hunting at this time was Almudron, a foe that roams these murky waters. I figured forging a hammer from this mighty leviathan would help. It did take a while though, as my hammer was getting dull and I used up my medical items during the fight, but eventually I took it down and made the hammer. It's only going to be useful against certain monsters due to having aquatic properties, but it's the best I could do for now. Surviving the flooded forest, day 108. I went around the forest to gather more plants to make more medical supplies as well as catch more fish. I also noticed there was a Zinogre when I was back at camp. Considering how uneventful the day was, I figured I needed some thrill. So I hunted the Zinogre and didn't have too much trouble, as in another life, this creature would have been such a pain to deal with in certain challenges. However, I did get bruised quite a bit, but despite that, I continued the battle, conquered the Zinogre, and was able to make a hammer from it. This will surely help with some of the next hunts. Surviving the flooded forest, day 127. I started my day hunting slagtots for meat and then hunting felines and mealinxes for rations. After that, I wanted to hunt something and Royal Ludroth was the only target around. I did pretty well against it with my electrified hammer. After that, I watched the sunset back at camp. There wasn't much for me to do for the rest of the night, but hopefully I can find that Valstrax if I hope to get out of this forest alive. Surviving the flooded forest, day 141. For the past 2 weeks, I've been dedicating most of my time to hunting for food, as well as hunting for large monsters to train in preparation to take on Valstrax. The training process was tedious and required lots of patience, but with time, the training was complete, and the next challenge appeared before me. That beast with a terrible presence that I encountered before, Rajang. If I hoped to beat Valstrax, I was going to have to defeat this monster. I didn't bring the electric hammer with me, as to my knowledge, I can't fight thunder with thunder since this monster can use electric powers. The Super Saiyan and I went head to head, hammer against the mighty fists. We exchanged blows, one after another, and after a tough battle, Rajang falls. I carve its parts and made a very strong hammer. Now I feel that I am ready for the final challenge. Surviving the flooded forest, day 153. Before I take on Valstrax, I have a plan. The plan is to take down the Crimson Glow and use its parts to build a ship that I can fly to the village with great speed. Valstrax is the only flying creature that has the parts and energy source that I can use to get me there quick. But I first need to prepare the resources before taking on this big task. It's not going to be easy, but it's either I take down Valstrax and get out of this forest, or die trying. I hope this plan works as I'm needed at the village and I miss my people, especially the guardian of the island. Surviving the flooded forest, day 179. I had gathered all the materials that I needed to prepare for the hunt with Valstrax, but there was one thing I needed to get before the search. The toad that was there when I slept in the ruin on day 1. It had special properties that could come in handy. In honor of the support it gave me, I brought it with me to prepare for the fight against the Crimson Glow. Now, the search begins. Surviving the flooded forest, day 198. It's been well over 2 weeks since I started my search for the elusive Valstrax, but I did find a very rare sight, a Chameleos. I never engaged it in combat since I needed to reserve all my medical supplies for the fight against the Crimson Glow, but I intend to keep searching. Surviving the flooded forest, day 224. It's been another 2 weeks and still haven't found the Valstrax. I'm starting to wonder if I'll ever find it at this point. It's been rather inconvenient when other, weaker monsters started to appear in the forest. While I would go to another continent to find the Valstrax, which would make my search easier, the problem is I'm unable to leave the forest due to a lack of available resources that I would then use to find another biome or land. At this point, it might take another month to find the Crimson Glow in this forest. Surviving the flooded forest, day 258. After searching for almost a month, I finally found the Valstrax. I proceeded to engage it in combat, and as I did, I found out a sudden realization. After all that preparation to take Valstrax down and use its parts to build a ship, the idea was deemed obsolete. The reason? I can tame the Crimson Glow and use it to fly out of here. Yes, even after this creature struck the Soritorium, I was willing to forgive it for causing my incident. So once I used my wire bugs to subdue Valstrax, I took it to a high vantage point, flew high, and blasted off into the sunrise. I am now heading to the village I was en route to since I was on the Soritorium as of writing this log. And I have to say, I've reconsidered my job as a blacksmith once I started to bond with Valstrax. I now want to become a writer. Next stop, Mahana Village.